The Ant Walkers of Hiroshima. This is a bit of a heavier topic, so if you can't handle that, I think you should leave. This is by Shrouded Hand. We'll look at this. Let's hope that since this is a little bit of a documentary, I don't get nuked. But we'll see. We'll see. We'll go in. But yeah, this is gonna be a bit depresso.
On August the 6th, 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was named Little Boy, and it was designed to detonate before hitting the ground.
Bro was a lot of things, just not little. As an American, this video made me feel, I don't know how to describe it. Interesting. Sad. No, I'm on my happy era. Ciao. Take care, Joe. Bye bye. But yeah, yep. Anything but little though. This one was anything but little.
The city had a population of around 350,000 people.
It's also kind of interesting to note, apparently, that both of these cities had the highest rate of Christians in Japan. I'm not gonna say what I think, but I think you get the idea. I find that a bit odd. Why specifically these two, regardless.
Initial explosion killed over 78,000 people, but some would say that these were the lucky ones. It's the accounts of people who survived that truly describe a hell on earth, and it's those accounts that I'm going to be exploring today. Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. This is the horror of the Hiroshima bomb. The accounts in this video come from Charles Pellegrino's book, To Hell and Back, The Last Train from Hiroshima. If you want to hear more stories like this, I recommend reading the book, because this video only scratches the surface of the nightmares described.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT.
Why is this motherfucker laughing? Why is he laughing? Why on earth is he laughing? What? He read this out and just started laughing. Either it's out of being nervous. I guess people do laugh when they're nervous or like when they feel weird. I guess that can happen. But okay.
We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won.
Akiko Takakura and her friend Asami were inside the Geibi Bank, and they were just about to open when the bomb detonated. Although they were relatively close to the hypocenter, just some 250 meters away, the bank's sturdy granite and concrete structure provided significant protection against the deadly atomic rays and the advancing shockwave. Nonetheless, when the shockwave hit, Akiko felt a painful squeezing sensation in her lungs. Asami was thrown against a wall and compressed like an accordion. And then the decorative cladding on the wall burst into shards of granite shrapnel.
I don't think that you had to be that specific about her being compressed like an accordion. That is insane. Regardless, I don't think that right. Regardless, if they made the mistake of going outside, regardless, I think that would have still resulted in death.
Akiko would later recall drifting in and out of consciousness during the first few minutes after the explosions. Her lungs ached and she struggled to comprehend what was happening to her body. Then came an overwhelming thirst unlike anything that they'd ever experienced. The bomb's explosion had instantly caused water to evaporate from rivers, ponds, and all exposed surfaces within a 2-kilometer.
Obvious also in her own body, right? In the own body, that makes sense. That's a logical conclusion.
Radius, stripping moisture from every living thing caught in the flash, even those who were inside buildings. They managed to fill air raid helmets with water from a ruptured pipe, but no matter how much they drank, their thirst only became more intense. Within a short while, the air inside the bank became unbearably hot, and the women decided that they must evacuate. At 8:25 am, 10 minutes after the explosion, they finally managed to step outside and they saw the extent of the devastation. The sun had completely disappeared, and the landscape was bathed in red, caused by fire rising from the remnants of buildings that had been reduced to burning rubble. Akiko looked down the streets, and at first it appeared to be empty, but then she noticed the charred remains of people who had been walking towards the bank when the bomb detonated. There were blackened, scorched bodies collapsed over each other as far as she could see. Several bodies had crumpled apart like
Artwork drawn by survivors. Very interesting. Hell on Earth, to put it lightly, of course. Yeah. And we still have these weapons of mass destruction. Woohoo! But it's also kind of good that we have multiple people have them now, because that keeps others from using them. Huh. Interesting. We are on a loop. Atomic bombs keep others from using atomic bombs.
Sacks of burning leaves spilled onto the ground. Others had been reduced to charcoal and piles of burning wax. Nearby, Akiko saw the body of a man who was still standing. He appeared to have been flash fossilized whilst pulling a large two-wheel cart. Inside the cart, she saw the bodies of two charcoal-crusted children. They were sitting, clutching their knees. Overwhelmed, she crouched down in the street, trying to comprehend what she was seeing, and then she noticed something on the ground next to her. Something that had remained soft and fleshy. It was a hand, its fingers sticking up and burning like candles, the fat being drawn to the fingertips from the tissues below. At this point it began to rain, and as the drops fell, the intense thirst returned, forcing Akiko and Asami to turn their faces towards the sky and drink the rain, opening their mouths as wide as possible.
Oh, yeah, they're dead. 100%. I mean, they've been dead regardless, right? The moment they stepped outside, they were dead. But now they're extra dead. Now they are really dead. Right? Because that rain is radioactive. They're now definitely dead.
The water tasted foul. When Akiko looked down at her arm, she noticed that the water was staining her skin black. The rain was thick and repulsive, like crude oil, but their thirst was so overwhelming that they just continued to drink. The city's vaporized moisture had ascended into the stratosphere. Here it had absorbed the stratospheric soot and radioactive particles from the bomb's cloud and begun to descend again. It was extremely toxic. Ingesting even small amounts of it delivered a deadly dose of radioactive material. Whilst Akiko survived, Asami would quickly succumb to radiation sickness and perish.
Well, that makes obviously sense. Mutually insured destruction or something like that. Imagine that, though. Black rain falling from the dark, sunless sky. Yep. And remember, you don't even know what happened, right? You just hear the loud explosion. You don't know what happened. You don't know that this is going on, right? You didn't expect that.
A boy named Hiroshi Ito was in school when the bomb was dropped. 5 minutes after the explosion, he managed to emerge unscathed through the roof of his collapsed school. Hiroshi stepped out into a mist of black fog. All the other boys around Hiroshi appeared to be severely burned. The toxic black mist and the black rain sent him and about 40 other students running to a nearby swimming pool, crying for help. On the swimming pool's floor, Hiroshi saw rows of schoolgirls slumped at the water's edge. The girls were dying one after another. Most of them wore only white shirts. Their dark pants had ignited when the flash came and had burned away along with the skin on their legs. When he later climbed out of the pool, everywhere he looked he saw burned schoolchildren moving in an eerie silence like automatons. They had blistered eyes and lips covered in black ash. They appeared to be resigned, strangely lifeless, despite still being alive. Hiroshi looked across the river to the opposite shore, and he saw hordes of people fleeing from the direction of the violent fires, falling into the river like swarms of insects. Riverside houses began collapsing into the water, and soon the people in the river were overtaken by burning debris.
That makes sense, yeah. I would have thought I died and woken up in hell, to be honest. Yeah, at that point, you probably would think that, yeah, it is kind of insane.
The ground around Hiroshi began to erupt into spontaneous fires. Panicked, he ran in random directions, desperate to get away. A 13-year-old boy named Yoshikata also managed to survive the collapse of his school, cocooned in an air pocket. He was able to push his way to the surface almost immediately after the blast, and he saw a massive mushroom cloud towering over the city. All around him, among the bricks and the rubble, he saw other children half buried and dying. Dozens of burned hands reached out, grabbing at Yoshi's feet and shins, desperate to get his attention. This was too much for him, and Yoshikata panicked. He kicked out at the hands reaching up from the rubble, and he ran as fast as he could into the smoke.
I mean, yeah, if you didn't know what was going on and random hands coming out of the floor and trying to grab you, yeah, that would feel like I was being pulled to hell, whatever. I can't even imagine being a kid during this either. Yeah, of course, right? One minute you were just chilling in school with your homies. Next minute, everything looks like you just ended up in a bat horror, in like a horror game.
Nearly 2 kilometers away from the hypocenter, Mrs. Sasaki was in her garden when the flash occurred. She emerged from the rubble holding her 2-year-old daughter Sadako in her hands. Somehow they were both uninjured. Years later, Mrs. Sasaki felt grateful that her daughter didn't remember much of what they'd seen that day. She never spoke to her daughter about the horrors that they'd witnessed, especially the tap dancer who'd ran past them moments after the explosion. Initially, Mrs. Sasaki thought that everyone around them had disappeared. Then she noticed a strange man climbing out of a collapsed house. He got up and ran past them towards the curtain of whirling smoke and sparks. He didn't cry for help, and he appeared to be unaware of anything or anyone around him. The only sound he made was a rhythmic click-clacking as he ran down the road, as if he was tap dancing down the street with metal taps on his shoes. Then Mrs. Sasaki noticed that he wasn't wearing any shoes. Instead, where his feet should have been, there were 2 bony stumps. As he ran, these protruding bones tapped against the pavement.
Bro just like his feet were gone and he just ran. Bro was locked in and just ran. I don't even think he was that conscious anymore. He just ran, damn, bro. The feet were gone.
Chipping and fracturing with each step. Soon the man disappeared into a cloud of smoke, and the nightmarish tapping faded into the distance. A soldier named Nishioka was stationed outside the city. He heard the bomb going off, and he saw a huge mushroom cloud rising above Hiroshima. Shortly afterwards, from the direction of the city, a train came running in. All of the train's coaches had lost their windows. Most of the passengers inside were burned to death, except for a few stunned people who gathered by the empty windows, looking out with blank expressions on their faces. The coaches were all smouldering. At least 2 were completely engulfed in flames. The soldiers looked on, stunned, as the train rolled past them. It didn't stop. The engineer at the front looked like a scarecrow, his clothes bloodied and tattered. He leaned out of the portside window, vomiting out a foaming stream of bile. The soldiers managed to stop the train and they took command of the locomotive. They decided to head back towards Hiroshima. The soldier Nishioka went with them. Within minutes, Nishioka and the other soldiers encountered lines of people walking along the railroad tracks away from the city. The engine pressed on, blowing its whistle to clear people off the tracks. The further they got into the city, the worse the burns.
And you need to consider this, that the buildings, right, at that time were not, many buildings were not concrete, right? These were wooden, a lot of those were still wooden buildings, which made everything worse, because it made everything burn even easier than it was before, right? If you drop that into a major city into the US, it would be terrible, it would be tragic, but the damage at the time would have been less than what is going on here, right? Remember that.
On the walking wounded gods. There were more and more people looking like the walking dead, shuffling along, constantly murmuring, "Water, water." They moved in a mechanical manner, forming long trails, one horribly burned person after another, slowly navigating through the smoke. Due to their burned, blackened skin and their automaton-like movements, many survivors would later refer to them as the Ant Walkers. Another soldier, Private Shigeru Shimoyama, was about 6 blocks away from the hypocenter when the explosion came. As luck would have it, he'd just stepped into a concrete reinforced warehouse. The force of the wave tossed him against the back wall, saving him from being crushed under a collapsing roof. Outside the warehouse, his fellow soldiers had all vanished in the blink of an eye. When he regained consciousness, to his horror, he discovered that he was hanging about a meter above the ground. His arms and shoulders were impaled on nails protruding from the wall. When he finally broke free and emerged from the rubble, he saw in the distance a group of bureaucrats struggling through.
Yikes! I wonder why. Maybe because they just saw someone moving in front of them. Yeah, no shit. What on earth? Wow.
The wreckage. These bureaucrats were carrying a life-sized portrait of the emperor away from the burning remains of the castle. Then on the river, Shigeru noticed a naval boat navigating through the debris and bodies. The boat slowed down and stopped. The crew gathered on the deck to salute the portrait of the emperor. This gesture seemed to stir something within the ant people, and many of these horribly burned people turned towards the portrait and bowed their heads. When he finally turned around, Shigeru found himself standing face to face with a horse. This horse was strange looking. It was pinkish white, and it took Shigeru a moment to realize what he was looking at. All of the horse's skin and fur were gone. This was caused by something known as degloving, a phenomenon where the skin, when exposed to a wave of compressed supersonic air, is pulled off like a leather glove being pulled from a hand.
Yo, stop! Ugh. Basically, the horse just got vacuum cleaned. Ew. Wow, so they also crazy that they just like bowed while being essentially cooked in the most literal sense possible.
The animal didn't appear to be in any pain, but the sight horrified Shigeru so much that he began to run away from the area.
You know why the horse wasn't in pain? It's actually quite simple. The nerves are dead. The skin, right? The skin is an organ, and when the skin's gone, probably significant nerve damage. Therefore, the horse cannot feel the pain because the pain receptors are destroyed. A skinless horse, definitely an SCP or something out there at this point.
Every time he glanced back over his shoulder, he saw this skinless horse following him, staring at the soldier pleadingly. Before the explosion, Father Matthias heard two planes overhead revving their engines as if they were trying to escape something. He doesn't know what happened after that. When he regained consciousness, he realised that he'd joined hundreds of other dazed, half-naked people and he'd become one of the ant walkers. He looked at the man in front of him and he noticed that his skin was hanging loosely from his back like pieces of tattered shirts. All of the flesh on his forearms had been stripped away, revealing blackened bones. Father Matthias aimlessly followed this walking corpse until he bumped into the frame of a charred streetcar. Inside the car, Father Matthias saw the scorched remains of a family. Then he noticed movement, an unborn baby struggling inside its dead mother.
Oh, it just gets worse with every minute and second! What on earth? Yeah, there's a reason we don't use these. There's a reason we don't use these anymore. There's a reason. Oh my god. Don't tell me this baby actually survived.
The horrified Father Matthias stumbled away. He didn't know where he was going. He just wanted to get away from the smouldering car as fast as he could. He noticed more than a dozen ant people had formed a line behind him and began to follow. He didn't know how long he'd been walking, but suddenly a noise from above caught his attention. He looked up and he saw the corner of a 3-story brick apartment building. It was the only structure still standing. 3 naked children clung to the top of the tower, screaming hysterically. One of them seemed to be completely covered in blood. Father Matthias continued walking. As he reached the river, the first rescue boats began pulling corpses from the water. Wading in, he noticed a woman carrying her child towards him, pleading for the infant to open his eyes. When the woman stepped into the water, her skin and muscles began to fall away from her bones. At this moment, Father Matthias's numbness began to crack and he was overwhelmed by a sense of guilt. That's when he started to think about the 3 children that he'd seen on top of the tower. Every day for the rest of his life, he wondered what had happened to them. Each night, they were the last thing that he thought about before falling asleep, and his dreams were plagued with their screams. Tsutomi Yamaguchi, a ship designer, was nearly 3 kilometers from Ground Zero when a bright flash almost blinded him. Instinctively, he dove into an irrigation ditch and covered his head. The ground shook violently, tossing him nearly a meter into the air.
Damn. Even 3 kilometers away. I don't think a single piece of media could ever be more horrific or terrible than this. Yep, obviously. You can't probably not portray this, right? Remember, this is also the reason why the Godzilla franchise exists, right? It was so traumatic that they literally needed a trail for it, right? In movies.
When Yamaguchi looked out, burning paper and smouldering clothes were falling from the sky. One side of his body felt intensely hot. The exposed skin on his left arm was burnt brown and looked like an overcooked chicken. He was suddenly overcome by an intense thirst and he ran towards the river. Despite the coppery scent of blood and the presence of floating corpses, Yamaguchi drank the water. He noticed that the bodies in the river appeared to have unnaturally long arms, almost twice as long as normal. Upon closer inspection, he realised that the flesh on their shoulders and arms had melted and peeled away from the bones, floating on the surface of the water like broken cobwebs, still connected to the people by their fingertips. By the river, he encountered a group of children who he would later refer to as the pierced boys. At first, he thought that their burned and lacerated backs had sprouted some kind of strange hair, but As he looked closer, he realised that these weren't hairs. Long, thin, blackened glass shards had been driven into the boy's flesh by the shockwave. He tried to help these children, advising them to pull these shards from each other's backs, but this proved to be extremely difficult. The children began to grow weaker, and they seemed to be dying one after another.
Well, you could also probably not pull it out. Consider that it basically may have already like fused due to the hit, fused with their skin, with their body, right? Yes, it is, which is something I think about sometimes whenever the big lizard is brought up. True. Wow. Horrible.
All around him, people moved in a zombie-like fashion, driven by an overwhelming thirst. They lay down at the river and drank the foul-smelling water before wandering off aimlessly into the smoke. By this point, Yamaguchi no longer cared about his military duties or the war efforts. All he wanted to do was to get home to see his wife and son. As he wandered through the devastated landscape, he saw one horror after another. A mother singing a lullaby to her dead child, a horse's head burning with an eerie blue-green flame. He had to cross 2 rivers on his way home. One of these rivers no longer had a bridge, but there were so many corpses piled up in the shallows that they formed a kind of natural dam that he had to cross. The experience of crawling over these burned bodies to cross the river was extremely traumatic. For the rest of his life,
yeah, you're not recovering from that. Nobody of these people recover. Remember, right? Most of these people died really early on, right? Due to the radiation. Probably a lot of those actually just straight up ended it, right? PTSD, you probably cancer, a lot of cancer, probably. Maybe blood loss. I mean, that's probably the least of concerns there, but still. Hi, Shine Duck. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. Hello. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of survivors. That sounds like a cursed omen, or just head on fire with blue flames. Ah, look at that. Horse rider, right? Ghost horse rider.
he would revisit that bridge in his nightmares. Walking in a state of shock, Akihiro Takahashi, a 14-year-old boy, was only mildly burned compared to the rest of the population. He followed streetcar tracks past wrecked, corpse-filled trolleys until he heard a friend calling his name. As he headed off towards his friend,
Oh god, his friend probably looked horrible. Soon one of my favorite dinosaurs in the VR game I play is coming to the shop. Interesting. Yeah, his friend probably looked horrible.
a line of ant people began to form behind him. His friend was so severely poisoned by radiation that his teeth were falling out. Akihiro would later say that before he died, his belly turned purple and he vomited a continuous stream of blue-grey substance. On his journey through the city, Akihiro
That's why so basically they're the ant people called ant people because they follow in like straight lines like some ants do. That's basically what it is.
saw many disturbing things. He encountered a woman with her eyeball dangling on her cheek, and he saw a skinned horse with exposed bloody muscle lying dead in a water-filled cistern. As he walked through the devastation, dozens of people followed him, although most of them no longer looked like humans. He was so horrified by these ant walkers that he tried to distance himself from them, but it seemed that with every twist and turn of his journey, new nightmares awaited him. He ran past the body of a young mother who had been completely degloved, with her screaming infant lying next to her. This baby somehow was...
That's as close as you can get to zombies. That is as close as you can get to zombies. Are you watching anything after this? I think I'm watching the one video that someone sent, and that's about it. Still, if there's still time left. That is terrifying. This is the closest you can get to literal zombie apocalypse. Humans who are so... how do you say, mentally away, that they're essentially just empty husks walking around. Kind of like Redeads in The Legend of Zelda.
Still alive, despite its entire skin being turned to charcoal. And this wasn't the last or even the worst horror that Akihiro encountered on his way. He would later say that
How can it be worse than this? How can we get worse?
there were other sights that were so horrifying that words can't describe them. The aftermath of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings was as harrowing as the explosions. The cities were reduced to smouldering ruins with just a few structures left standing and almost no life.
Again, of course, considering that a lot of these, right, were wooden buildings. Of course they wouldn't stand a chance against a bomb this powerful.
The initial death toll from the blasts was staggering, but the long-term consequences were equally devastating. The survivors, known as hibakusha, faced not only the physical horror of their injuries, but also the lasting effects of radiation exposure. Many survivors developed acute radiation sickness, which manifested as nausea, hair loss, and severe burns that healed slowly, if at all.
And cancer. A lot of this caused cancer.
In the weeks and months that followed, the death toll continued to rise as infections, organ failure, and cancers claimed many more lives. The cleanup and recovery process was an extremely grim task. Rescue workers
I don't feel sympathy. What I'm saying. I don't. I cannot put myself into the people that had to, clean this up. I feel just as much sympathy for those, because like, right, you weren't there, but you get to see the aftermath. You get to see everything that, right, you have to clean up. You have to, right, get all the bodies. You have to take care of all the wounded, the injured, right? You have to worst case, there's family of yours there as well, right? Terrifying.
many of whom were soldiers and volunteers, had to navigate through the charred remains of the city and all.
Not only that, right? You didn't know what was going on, right? So chances are you went there to help and then became a victim yourself because of the radiation. So even then you couldn't escape.
All of the horrors that it had to offer. When soldiers sent by the War Ministry arrived at the city carrying stretchers, they couldn't understand why they'd been sent because there was not a living thing in sight. When they entered Ground Zero, they found a statue-like figure of a naked man standing with his arms and legs spread apart. The man had been turned into a brittle pillar of charcoal, crumbling at the slightest touch. He must have climbed out of a shelter shortly before the blast, driven by the hot fumes, only to be killed and carbonized instantly where he stood. They encountered a young, petite woman carrying the bloated corpse of a dead child on her back. She seemed to be completely insane, screaming incomprehensibly, her shouts getting louder and louder over time. They encountered another woman whose mind appeared to have been completely wiped clean. She appeared to be uninjured except for a large slash across her belly. The soldiers propped her up against the wall where she spent the night. In the morning they found her sitting in a pool of her own blood. It seemed as if she'd spent the night carefully trying to push her own intestines back inside herself. It was at this point that they noticed that she was pregnant. A baby.
Oh no! That baby's probably dead, I'm assuming. Ugh. Yeah. Okay, yeah, bro.
Only halfway to term, had emerged from her belly along with her intestines, and it hung lifelessly from her body. When soldiers approached to try and help her, she gave them a hideous smile before collapsing and dying. The psychological toll on the rescuers and the survivors was profound. For years afterwards, many struggled with the haunting memories of the dead and dying, the eerie silence of the devastated cities, and the incomprehensible sense of loss. Even now, decades later, these scars, both physical and emotional, remain.
Yeah, no wonder the Japanese gave up afterwards.
So I hope you found this video interesting. I think this provides just a tiny snapshot.
Well, that's the pretty much the end of the video. Yeah, it is no surprise that Japan gave up over this one. Yeah, I mean, the Emperor probably saw also some shit, I'm assuming, but that is crazy. That is actually insane. That is horrifying. That was rather horrifying. Yeah, crazy.